The sky that morning was colorless, neither night nor day, just a tired gray that seemed unsure what it wanted to be. The kind of sky that feels like waiting. The kind that knows something is ending. I stood by the sliding glass doors, holding my passport in one hand and my mother's scarf in the other. The scarf was pale blue, soft and frayed at the edges. She'd left it draped over the car seat, the faint scent of jasmine still clinging to it. I didn't mean to take it, but when she turned to close the door, I reached for it without thinking, as if holding it could make her stay. They didn't look back. My father waved once, his eyes already on the road. My mother pressed her lips together in a smile that didn't quite make it to her eyes. "You'll thank us one day," she'd said before stepping into the car. And then the sound of the engine drowned everything. The car moved, slow at first, then faster, a gray sedan shrinking into the fog until it was gone. That's how it happened. No shouting, no tears. Just the quiet kind of goodbye that hurts more because it looks polite. The airport's glass doors opened and closed behind me, letting in gusts of cold air that smelled like jet fuel and rain. Around me, families hugged and laughed, their goodbyes loud and alive. Fathers lifted children onto their shoulders. Mothers tucked sandwiches into backpacks. People leaving, but not like me. They all had someone waiting for them on the other side. I didn't. I was 17, a year too young to know how to start over, and a year too old to believe someone would come back. The woman at the check-in counter smiled when I handed her my ticket. "Traveling alone?" she asked. I nodded. My voice wouldn't work. She gave me a sticker to wear on my jacket. It said unaccompanied minor in small, polite letters. I peeled it off the moment I sat down near the gate. I didn't want to be marked. The flight number blinked on the screen above me. Toronto, Florence. A country I'd never seen. A language I could barely pronounce. They said it was for my future. Art school in Europe, my mother had said, like she was offering me a gift. My father said, "It's time for you to learn independence." But I'd seen the way they avoided each other at dinner those last few weeks. The quiet arguments behind closed doors. The way they'd stopped including my name in their plans. The truth came slowly, like frost forming on glass. I wasn't being sent away for opportunity. I was being sent away because I didn't fit the life they wanted to keep. When the boarding call echoed through the terminal, my chest felt tight. I remember clutching my backpack straps so hard that the seams dug into my palms. The seats on the plane were cold. The woman beside me offered gum before takeoff. I shook my head and turned toward the window. As the plane lifted, I watched the city shrink beneath me, the grid of lights fading into clouds. Somewhere down there, my parents were already back home, maybe washing dishes, maybe pretending the silence didn't feel heavier now that I was gone. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears waited. They came later, weeks later, when the loneliness stopped being loud and started being ordinary. Florence looked nothing like the pictures. The cab from the airport passed streets lined with old stone buildings, balconies full of drying clothes, people arguing and laughing in a language I didn't know. Everything was alive, but I felt invisible, like a ghost walking through someone else's dream. The student housing was small, tucked behind a narrow alley that smelled of rain and espresso. My room was on the 3rd floor. One small bed, one desk, one window that looked out onto the courtyard. The first night, I sat on the bed and opened my phone, scrolling through photos of home. My parents hadn't texted. Not once. I typed a message, landed safely. "The city's beautiful." Then deleted it. What was the point? The weeks that followed were quiet. I learned how to stretch a bag of rice into 3 meals. I walked everywhere because buses cost too much. I learned enough Italian to order coffee and ask for directions. Sometimes I'd stand by the Arno River and watch the sunlight shimmer over the water, the air smelling faintly of bread and damp stone. People laughed around me, students sketching on the steps, couples leaning close over gelato cups. I wanted to join them, but something in me had turned cautious, like a door left half open. I started sketching again. Faces mostly. Strangers from the market, a girl feeding pigeons, an old man reading by the fountain. I filled notebooks until my hands ached. Drawing was the only thing that made the silence bearable, but nights were harder. The city would go quiet and the thoughts would start. Do they ever think of me? Do they even miss me? What did I do wrong? I'd replay our last dinner together in my head, the one before the flight. My father had barely spoken. My mother asked if I'd packed enough socks. There was chicken on the table, my favorite, but I couldn't eat. I remember asking, "Will you visit?" My mother's fork paused midair. "We'll see, sweetie." My father didn't look up. That was the moment I think I understood. The trip wasn't temporary. It was a goodbye they didn't want to say out loud. Months passed. I got a part-time job cleaning the hallways of a small hotel. I'd wake before sunrise, mop the marble floors, and listen to the soft hum of the city waking up. The pay wasn't much, but it was mine. Each euro earned felt like proof that I could exist without them. I started to build something, slowly, carefully. A routine, a life, a kind of fragile peace. Still, every now and then I'd find myself holding that scarf, the one I took from the car seat. The jasmine scent had long faded, but it still carried warmth. It reminded me that even love, when it's conditional, leaves traces. 9 years later, when I stepped out of the taxi in front of my parents' old house, that same scarf was in my bag. The air was cooler than I remembered, and the street was quiet except for the rustle of dry leaves against the pavement. The house looked smaller, tired, almost shy. The white paint was peeling, the gate hung crooked on its hinges, and yet, it still felt like the center of something I'd been orbiting all these years. I stood there a long time before walking up the path. Somewhere inside, I could still hear my mother's voice calling my name for dinner. My father's laugh when I told him about my first art exhibit in middle school. The echo of who we used to be. But that was long ago. Now it was just me, the girl they left, standing on the doorstep of a house they didn't know they'd lost. And that was the beginning of the return. The letter came folded in 3, tucked beneath a stack of bills. It was thin, written in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting, though the ink looked shaky, as if her hand had trembled through each word. To the new owner, we are asking for just a little more time. My husband has been unwell, and things have been difficult. We promise to pay as soon as we can. This house is all we have left. Thank you for understanding. LR, she hadn't signed it Mom, just her initials. I read it 3 times before setting it down. The air in my apartment felt suddenly too still, too small. I stood there, staring at the paper, hearing her voice in my head. The same calm, measured tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. But beneath the words, I could feel it. That old avoidance. The habit of explaining instead of apologizing. They didn't know. They didn't know the house they were pleading for already belonged to the daughter they'd left behind. The lawyer had called months earlier, his tone casual. "It's a foreclosure situation," he'd said. "They're older, the bank's been patient, but the property's overdue. It could be a clean investment for you." Clean. That was the word he used. I remember setting the phone down after that call and sitting in silence for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from me. The part of me that had learned survival whispered, "Walk away." But another voice, softer and more human, whispered, "No. Not this time." Buying it wasn't revenge. I didn't want them to hurt. I just wanted to reclaim something I'd lost, something that had been taken from me before I understood how much it meant. I told myself it was just property, paperwork, numbers. But when the sale went through, when my name appeared on the deed, I cried, quietly, unexpectedly, like something inside me had finally come full circle. The day I saw them again, I didn't mean to. It was late afternoon, the sun sliding behind the rooftops, when my property manager called. "The tenants are here," he said. "They're asking for an extension. Want to meet the owner in person." My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want to see their faces. I didn't want the old ache to wake up again, but I heard something in his voice. Pity, maybe. "They seem desperate, Ms. Linton. The husband looks frail." Frail. My father had always been large in my memory, broad shoulders, voice that filled a room. Hearing him described as frail felt like a thread pulling loose inside me. I told the manager I'd come. The drive back to that street felt unreal. Every corner looked both familiar and strange. The bakery that used to sell almond bread, the cracked sidewalk I'd tripped on as a child. The closer I got, the slower I drove, like my body was bracing for impact. When I parked in front of the house, dusk had begun to fall. The lights inside flickered weakly, a single lamp near the window, yellow and soft. I waited in the car, watching them through the glass. My father moved slower now, careful and deliberate. My mother stood near him, her hair thinner, her posture bent. They looked smaller, like the world had worn them down. For a moment, I almost started the engine again. I could have left and kept the distance intact. But then my mother turned toward the window, and for the briefest second, our eyes met through the glass, and I couldn't move. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish. The wallpaper had peeled at the edges, and the kitchen sink dripped in steady rhythm, a sound I remembered from childhood nights. They were sitting in the living room when I stepped in. My father looked up first. His face went still, as if his mind couldn't reconcile what his eyes were seeing. My mother rose halfway from her chair, one hand gripping the armrest for balance. "Mara?" she whispered, her voice cracked like porcelain. I nodded. "Hi, Mom." My father blinked hard. "What are you doing here?" I took a breath. This is my house. Silence spread between us, heavy and alive. My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother looked at the floor. "You bought it?" she finally said. "Yes. Why?" The question wasn't sharp. It was bewildered, almost childlike. I looked around the room before answering. The walls, the window, the corner where the old piano used to be. Because I wanted to remember what staying feels like. We didn't talk for a long time after that. They sat. I stood. The air between us filled with things that had been unsaid for nearly a decade. When my father finally spoke, his voice had softened. "We thought you were doing fine." "You never wrote." "I did," I said quietly. "Once, the letter came back." My mother's face went pale. "We moved that year. We didn't know where you were anymore. You had my number." She flinched. "I lost it," she said after a moment. It was such a small lie, the kind that used to slide easily between us. But hearing it now after everything felt different. It didn't sting. It just confirmed what I'd always known. They'd chosen silence over discomfort. I realized standing there that I didn't need their apology. I'd already made peace with the version of them that couldn't face what they'd done. So I said the truest thing I could. "It's okay." My mother looked up, startled. "I'm not angry," I continued. "Not anymore." My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You should be." "I was," I said. "For a long time." But it didn't change anything. It just made the years quieter. He looked down at his hands, old, lined, trembling slightly. "We thought we were helping you." "I know," I said softly. "And maybe, in a strange way, you did." The next hour passed like a slow unraveling. We spoke in fragments: the price of medicine, the rising rent, how they'd fallen behind after his surgery. They'd sold almost everything except this house. I listened. Not because I needed to understand, but because I finally could, without breaking. As they talked, I noticed small things. The way my father still rubbed his wedding ring when he was nervous, the way my mother's voice lowered whenever she said sorry. These small, familiar gestures softened the space between us, though we all knew some distances can't be crossed by words. When they finally fell quiet, my mother looked up at me and asked, "What happens now?" I could have told them about the paperwork, the rent, the choices I had every right to make. Instead, I said, "You can stay, for now." Her eyes filled, and she nodded once, a small, grateful motion that seemed to hold years of unsaid things. My father tried to speak, but his voice caught. He simply reached out his hand. It hovered in the air for a moment, uncertain. Then I took it. His grip was weak but warm, and for the first time in years I felt no anger. Just a quiet, fragile kind of peace. Later that night, after they'd gone to bed in the small guest room, I walked through the house alone. Every corner seemed smaller than my memory had painted it. My old bedroom still had faint marks on the wall where I'd taped my drawings. I ran my hand over them, feeling the grooves beneath the paint. I thought about the girl I used to be. 17, scared, waiting in an airport. I wanted to tell her that she would survive, that she'd learn how to make a life from emptiness. That one day she'd stand here whole and unbroken. The moonlight fell across the hallway in thin silver lines. I paused at the window and whispered, "I made it." And for the first time, the house didn't echo back with silence. It just listened. The morning light came soft through the kitchen curtains, the kind of light that makes everything seem gentler, even the broken things. My mother was already up, standing by the sink with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The steam curled against her face, hiding the wrinkles around her mouth. She didn't look at me when I walked in, but she smiled. Small, uncertain, the way people do when they're not sure if they're still welcome. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She shook her head. The house sounds different now, quieter. It always was quiet, I said. We just didn't notice. She nodded, her eyes tracing the familiar corners of the room. It feels smaller, too. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her. The scent of the tea, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath us. All of it felt like an echo of a life I'd once tried to forget. We stood in silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The following days unfolded slowly. Like pages turning in a book I'd once closed, my parents stayed longer than they planned. They said it was temporary, just until they figured things out, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. My father took to fixing small things, tightening door hinges, oiling the squeaky window locks, sweeping the porch. My mother cleaned in circles, as if each polished surface could erase a piece of guilt. I didn't stop them. I let them exist in that fragile rhythm. Sometimes I'd find my father sitting in the garden near the old mint patch, his hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed. The garden had gone wild, weeds climbing over the fence, dead vines tangled in the soil. Yet he seemed peaceful there, like a man finally sitting still after years of running. Once, when I brought him water, he looked up and said, "You took good care of this place. I wanted to say you didn't, but the words never came." Instead, I said, "I tried." He nodded. That's all anyone can do. It was the closest thing to an apology he ever gave me. At night, I'd lie awake in my old room, staring at the ceiling. The same cracks were there, faint but familiar, running like pale rivers through the paint. The walls still held faint shadows where my drawings used to hang, but I wasn't the girl who had left. The walls couldn't hold me anymore, not in the same way. One night, I heard my parents talking quietly in the living room. My father's voice was low, my mother's soft and wavering. I couldn't make out the words, only the sound. Two people remembering how to speak to each other after years of distance. It should have hurt hearing them like that. Instead, it felt gentle, like the past was finally settling down. A week later, the first letter arrived. Not for me this time, but for them. It was from the city office, confirming that the house title had officially transferred. My name was the only one on it. My mother held the paper for a long time, tracing the printed letters of my name. Then she looked up, her eyes glassy. "So it's really yours," she said quietly. "Yes. And we're—" "What, guests?" I met her gaze. "You're home for as long as you need it." Her mouth trembled. "Mara, we don't deserve—" "Maybe not," I said softly. But neither did I, and I still found my way. Her breath caught. I saw the words she wanted to say, "I'm sorry," resting just behind her lips. But she didn't speak them aloud. Maybe she didn't have to. Sometimes silence is the most honest apology there is. That evening, I cooked dinner, pasta with garlic and basil, simple, familiar. My mother set the table while my father opened a bottle of cheap wine he'd bought from the corner store. For the first time in years, we sat together. Not as the family we used to be, but as the one that remained. The conversation was light, weather, old neighbors, my work. My father listened more than he spoke. My mother laughed once, the sound small but real. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me and said, "You've done well, Mara." It was a simple sentence, but it landed deep. Not because I needed her approval, but because it sounded like recognition, the kind of acknowledgement I'd stopped hoping for long ago. I smiled. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I have." The next morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it was meant for me. Inside was a short note written in my mother's careful hand. "We're leaving today. Your father thinks it's time to start over somewhere smaller. Thank you for letting us stay. Thank you for your kindness even when we didn't deserve it. You were stronger than we ever were." Below that, a postscript. "The garden's ready for planting again. You should grow something." I read it twice, then pressed the paper flat on the table. Outside, I heard the sound of the car door closing, the low hum of the engine. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't wave. I just stood there, hand resting on the note, feeling the quiet settle around me like sunlight after a storm. After they left, I walked through the house again, slowly, room by room. It felt different this time, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I opened every window, letting the cold autumn air sweep through. carrying out the ghosts of old arguments and forgotten apologies. In the living room, I found my father's screwdriver still on the floor near the window latch. I picked it up and smiled. He never did finish fixing that hinge. I left it there. A small reminder that not everything needed to be perfect to be at peace. Then I went outside. The garden was quiet. The earth, though wild, was soft beneath my shoes. I crouched down where the mint had once grown and began pulling the weeds, one by one,